Welcome to this presentation on the Construction Industry Scheme for Subcontractors, Part 2. I'll refer to the Construction Industry Scheme as SIS from now on. This presentation is in 2 chapters, and this is the second one, covering payment and deduction statements, record keeping, and tax returns. Remember, there's more information about SIS in the booklet SIS 340 on the HMRC website. Every time you give your contractor an invoice or ask for a payment, your contractor works out the deduction he has to make from your payment. Here's an example for a subcontractor called John. John isn't VAT registered. He buys materials which the contractor pays him for later. He charges his labour for the job at £400 and materials at £240, making a total of £640. The contractor starts with the amount he owes John and then has to take away any VAT John has charged him, materials, any fuel used except for travelling, plant hire, and manufacturing or prefabricating materials. Here, the only amount to take away is the cost of John's materials, so the balance before making the deduction is £400. The contractor then applies the 20% deduction to the amount that's left to work out the amount he needs to deduct. So, £400 at 20% gives a deduction of £80, and this leaves a net amount of £320. So in this example, John is paid a net amount of £320 and the cost of his materials at £240, and this makes a total of £560. Here's a copy of a typical SIS statement that's on the HMRC website. Contractors can use their own, as long as it has all the information shown here. The contractor can include other information to help you understand the payment, for example, the amount of VAT charged by you. An advantage of working as a subcontractor is that it's the contractor's responsibility to calculate any deduction and give you a statement every time you're paid. Statements are normally monthly, but you could get one for each payment if payments are more frequent. Some contractors also give statements to their gross paid subcontractors, though they don't have to do this. Contractors need to give you the statement within 2 weeks of the end of each tax month. The statement can be electronic, as long as you and the contractor both agree to this method, and you can store and print it. If a statement is lost or mislaid, then you can ask the contractor for a duplicate, but this should be clearly marked duplicate. This presentation covers the work you do as a subcontractor, but you might find that you're also sometimes working as an employee or on a self-employed basis for a private household which is outside SIS. You need to keep records for each type of income. The good news is when you've registered as a subcontractor and have a unique taxpayer reference, you don't need to register as self-employed again. John, like many other subcontractors, also sometimes works as an employee and sometimes as self-employed for private households. He keeps records and organises these into 3 sections: as a subcontractor, as an employee, and those jobs he does as self-employed that are outside SIS, normally for private households. By keeping his records this way, John finds it easier to fill in his tax return at the end of each year. Statements are an important part of SIS records. However, you also need to keep full details of your expenses and business records. There are separate presentations on business expenses and business records. John's expenses include the materials he provides and his protective clothing. His business records include payment and deduction statements, receipts, and his bank statements. Some of John's contracts are as an employed general labourer. Your employer should give you the records you need to keep. This can include copies of your contract or terms and conditions. You'll probably also get payslips. Every time you stop working for an employer, they must give you a Form P45 showing your earnings and tax deducted. The P45 comes in different parts. You keep the P45 Part 1A. You'll find that it has all the details you might need to put on your tax return. You could also get a P60. This is where you're still employed, but the tax year has ended. It's really important to keep any P45 Part 1As and P60s you get, as you need them for your tax return. When you fill in the tax return, the SIS work and self-employed work go in the same section, self-employment. John takes the amount he's paid by contractors for SIS work before any deduction. He then adds this to his other self-employed jobs. This total is shown as turnover on the self-employed pages on his tax return. The self-employed section of your tax return also has a place for you to put any deductions taken from your payment and deduction statements. It's important that you correctly fill this in. HMRC has other presentations on self-employment and keeping business records, so I'm not going to repeat the information here. Feel free to watch these presentations afterwards, though. When filling in your tax return, you need to show any employment income separately from your SIS and self-employment income. If you're employed, as well as working as a subcontractor, then you should answer yes that you were employed and yes that you were self-employed. You might have worked for more than one employer or had more than one business. If you had more than one of each, you need to tell us how many and their names. When you work out the tax payable by your business, you use the full amount of the invoice. The tax due is reduced by any SIS deductions that contractors have already taken from you. This is why it's important that you show the correct amount of these deductions on your tax return. When your allowances and expenses are taken into account, you may be due a tax repayment. If you owe any more tax, it'll be due by the 31st of January following the end of the tax year. John has kept his records and sends his tax return within the deadline and pays his tax bill on time. By doing this, he avoids penalties. HMRC can charge you a penalty if you don't keep adequate records or if you destroy your records too soon. HMRC can also charge a penalty if you send in a tax return that isn't correct, and can charge you interest if you underpay your taxes. Keeping accurate, up-to-date records will help you to fill in your tax return, avoid penalties, and pay the right amount of tax. If you do make a mistake, then HMRC won't charge a penalty if you can show that you took reasonable care with your tax. Keeping accurate records is one way of showing this. The HMRC website has lots of information on record keeping and on sending in your tax returns. Ask yourself, am I keeping accurate records? You can see this presentation again or look at another one. All our presentations are free and many people are taking this opportunity to see more than one. Thank you for watching.